So the ending of Assassin's Creed Mirage throws a lot at you, and it might leave you wanting for context if you haven't recently played Valhalla or read The Secret Crusade. That's the novel that details Altair's life, introducing this tomb beneath Alamut as well as the devices that it houses. So in this video I'll be explaining Basim's identity, the Alamut Vault and its contents, and finally Roshan's decision, as well as our last chronological appearance in Valhalla's final quest. If one of those three specific segments interests you, I've timestamped the video, but that's enough preamble. Basim. If you played Valhalla, you'll likely remember the mythical arcs. Eivor is troubled by recurrent visions of Odin, who insists that she pursue a more personal glory, often at the expense of the people that she cares about. When she uses a hallucinogenic to interrogate her visions, Eivor takes on the perspective of Odin, and in these hallucinations she comes across various allies and associates of hers, also layered in Norse myth. Basim's Norse equivalent is Loki, a god known for his underhanded schemes. Loki and Odin are frequently at odds. They're very different personalities. One disagreement they have relates to destiny. A great catastrophe called Ragnarok is foretold, and when Odin desperately tries to subvert his fate, Loki admonishes him, telling Odin that the more one resists their destiny, the more certain it becomes. It's foretold that when Ragnarok comes, Loki's son, Fenrir, will be the one to kill Odin, and in response, Odin does all that he can to protect himself from the boy, and his cruel actions are pretty much absolved because their society resents Fenrir, a bastard child mothered by a member of a different social caste to Loki and Odin. Eivor's Norse filter characterizes Fenrir as a mangy wolf. He truly is seen as an abomination, and above all, a threat. When Odin finally resolves to imprison the boy for life, Loki is set against Odin and obsesses over his revenge. Ahead of Ragnarok, Odin obtains a technology that would reincarnate he and his peers in new bodies following the disaster. Loki infiltrates this process and joins their party of reincarnates. His last known words are a vow to find Odin on the other side of Ragnarok. It gradually becomes clear that Eivor's hallucinations are real memories cloaked in a familiar aesthetic. Odin and Loki were Isu, not gods, but a humanoid precursor race who engineered and ruled over humans before a great catastrophe called Ragnarok in Eivor's visions led to their eventual extinction. But that's far from the end of these Isu. As planned, the memories of Loki and Odin and his peers resurface once and only once in human hosts called sages. Though the initial process is a success, a sage's recollection of their past life is never so simple. Just as Eivor rationalized her ancient memories by transposing her religious beliefs onto them, Basim also processes his past with something contemporary to his culture, the genie. So why don't these Isu memories resurface cleanly? Well, Basim and Eivor aren't Isu. They're otherwise normal 9th century humans lacking the terms to really understand and follow something as foreign and bizarre as this layered Isu history. There's an idea in cognitive science that analogy is central to problem solving, that more complex ideas can be simplified and made more digestible only by explaining why one familiar idea is analogous to the complex new idea. Built into Norse paganism and Islam, there are accessible figures, icons, and narrative tropes that are analogous to those of the less accessible Isu. What we see is basically a translation from one language to another using religious metaphor. What Mirage's third act entails is basically Basim stripping back of the metaphor. Nehal and the genie have been with Basim for a long time, but until now he's only understood those two things in a fairly literal sense, a friend and a nightmare. They actually personify Loki's memories and Loki's torture. Everything that Basim imagines Nehal does is his own doing. Early in the game, a kid from Anbar, Jasab, tries in jest to steal Basim's pouch. Nehal clocks this, looks to Basim, and then he responds. And all of these dialogues between the two are basically inner conflicts externalized as a dialogue between two different personalities. You'll notice that Nehal, being representative of Loki, is always a dissenting voice when it comes to the Hidden Ones, who would have Basim kill his past, kill Loki. Nehal is always pushing Basim closer to the truth, and when he uncovers it, she essentially dies and becomes one with Basim. With Loki's repressed memories uncorked, there's no longer use for the metaphor. This unraveling occurs when Basim discovers, at some point as Loki, he was imprisoned and tortured. The genie survives as an expression of Loki's torment. See this very intentional cut here. Isu torturer and Isu victim become the genie and Basim respectively. Who exactly the torturer is, we don't know. I doubt that it's Odin because he acts mainly out of concern for himself and he lacks the implied sadistic quality of the torturer, and also it'd just be a pretty significant detail to omit from Valhalla. But really, I think the torturer's identity is beside the point. While some future story may well fill in that gap, what really matters here is the broader picture of torment, and this snowball of rejection that is constantly rolling downhill, with Loki suffering some perhaps unjust slight, responding to said slight only to be kicked down again and further ostracized. Alienation is a key theme in Loki's story, and I think what this memory summarizes and communicates to Basim is that estrangement, this constant in Loki's life. And that's really going to resonate after being turned on by the person he looked up to the most, who brought him in to a new family. These alienating memories of Loki's likely inform some of Basim's lone wolf sensibilities that we see in Valhalla. In Mirage, he's very warm and patient, whereas in Valhalla, Basim's charisma is more often used to manipulate than to genuinely comfort or console. And one last thing that does need clarification here is that Basim and Loki are not one and the same. Basim still has agency over his decisions, and he, like Eivor with Odin, responds to Loki in his own way. In Eivor's case, there's a defiance of Odin and all that he stands for. Eivor initially denies that there's anything true in what she sees. Sigurd, on the other hand, takes on an opposing delusion. He embraces his memories of Tyr and begins thinking of himself as a deity. Now, the Isu weren't gods and neither is Sigurd, but I'd say that the idea, at least, affirms a lot of the right things for Sigurd, him being a bit of a neurotic and insecure leader. Basim's relationship with his sage memories lies in the sober middle. He's the most truly self-aware. The misconception I see a lot is that Basim is just the host body of Loki, this evil, corruptive force who at some point just did away with the mind of the boy from Samara, but Basim's awakening is just that. Loki's memories resurface and Basim feels them as if they were his own. The loss of Fenrir is felt deeply and Basim seeks retribution in killing Odin's reincarnate, Eivor, but on the other hand, it's evident that Basim has memories and passions completely independent from Loki. He loves his home, and in the present day, Basim expresses an earnest love for the Creed. Mirage's Basim is never replaced in any real sense. He's only made aware of his own nature and the repressed memories floating around his head. Everything Basim does going forward, he does of his own volition. Now for the delivering of these memories. The Alamut Vault was likely always something that Mirage was going to involve. This is very old, untapped lore that relates to Altair and Ezio. Few locations were more ripe for a game of so many narrative homages. Now, the reason this may be news to some of you is because Alamut wasn't introduced in a game. Generally, if you're lost on an important plot point, there's an Assassin's Creed coloring book or doorstop you've been too neglectful to pick up. But Alamut isn't actually from something super obscure. It was introduced in The Secret Crusade. That's the novel that details Altair's life, stitching together every game involving Altair with some completely new chapters. You might remember one memory in Assassin's Creed Revelations that sees Altair and his wife Maria returning to Masyaf after seeing to duties in the East. Abbas has usurped control of the Brotherhood and bastardized the Creed beyond recognition. When Altair lashes out at Abbas, Maria is fatally stabbed. Following this, Altair exiles himself to Alamut, an assassin stronghold east of Masyaf. Here, he spends years in study of the apple. One day, it directs him to a vault containing circular Isu artifacts known as memory seals. These devices can record and then render one's memories at the wielder's convenience. In his decades of study, Altair becomes aware of a second impending catastrophe, and he understands, if only vaguely, that a prophet will convey the messages necessary to prevent it. Altair leaves his apple beneath Masyaf in a grand library. The library's 5 keys are memory seals, each one embedded with an important memory that the prophet could in some way learn from. Luckily for Sarah Beaulieu, Mirage's narrative director, Secret Crusade is very vague about the vault and its contents. I think it's literally just a paragraph, possibly kept intentionally nondescript so that future writers had the flexibility to do something like introducing scores of memory seals as opposed to just the 6 that Altair makes use of. Dozens of them line the walls of the vault, and this makes sense. The Isu knew a catastrophe was incoming for years before it actually happened, and as it became less likely to be subverted, more Isu took to preserving their messages and even consciousnesses in various forms. And it's my guess that this message was left by Loki for himself, as a stark and quite literal wake-up call for his reincarnate. After Nehal, but actually Basim activates the seal and witnesses Loki's torture, Basim is able to banish the genie and accept his identity, setting him on course to eventually avenge Fenrir. This is the exact thing that Loki would want, and it feels like a characteristic move of such a calculating man. But of course, that's not a sure thing, that's just my theory. Because there's no clear perspective here, this memory could well belong to the torturer or an unlocking associate. We don't know who these people are or what they wanted from Loki, if there even was an end goal. There's not really a lot to speculate on. The torturer's dagger resembles the Isu dagger that Basim can claim from the Oasis Vault, but that doesn't tell us much. We know he's an Isu. And the lack of detail makes me more sure of my theory. Because the memory isn't of any apparent practical use and we're just left with the emotional content of it all, I think this was meant as a splash of cold water from one life to the next. Though, if that even is the case, it's not as easy as Basim simply reclaiming the seal. This whole game springs into action over its theft. But why do the Order of the Ancients want it, and why do the Hidden Ones take on so much heat to keep it from them? Well, the Order of the Ancients are Isu supremacists. They're interested less in the influence they cultivate than the access that said influence grants them to Isu knowledge and technology. The endgame of their ideology would be a world in which the Isu are reincarnated and made rulers of the Earth, something their ideological successors, the Instruments of the First Will, attempted to realize over the mid-2010s. And supremacy of any kind is, of course, an affront to the Hidden Ones, who are concerned primarily with freedom. Progress gained by the Order is progress lost by the Brotherhood. This is why Roshan and Kabiha both seek out the seal at the beginning of the game, because it would further the Order's understanding of the Isu, and so would a look around Basim's head. Basim's accidental activation of the seal is witnessed by Abu Abdallah, and then explained to his mother, Kabiha, who, if you missed the Flavius moment, is this Order's leader. Kabiha implies that Basim is special for being able to engage the seal. Though the Order never really get their hands on it, they understand what Basim's activation of the memory seal means. The Isu designed the Pieces of Eden as exclusive technologies that the human DNA couldn't commune with. Due to Isu-human crossbreeding, they developed a contingent of humans who had enough Isu DNA to activate Pieces of Eden. This is why Altair, Ezio, and Desmond could each activate the Apple of Eden, for example. They each had an unusually high concentration of Isu DNA. And we know from the House of Wisdom assassination that the Order understands at least fundamental Isu biology. Fazl has drawn graphs of the triple helix DNA strand, a quality unique to the Isu. So it's fair to assume that the Order understands how the activation of Isu artifacts typically works, and that Basim houses precious Isu DNA. They may possibly even be onto his sage status. If Loki did leave the seal for himself, then maybe he made its contents accessible only to him. We don't really know. In any case, Basim is a person of great value to the Order, and something of a liability to Roshan. She insists that Basim kills his pest and grounds himself in the cause, in part because that would be conducive with Hidden One doctrine and seemingly her own transformation into a Hidden One, but also because she's likely wary of what awakening an Isu consciousness could do to a Hidden One. It could invoke feelings of betterness and authority that are misaligned with their mission. In Roshan's eyes, this revelation is of no benefit to Basim, and what we see in response to its explanation is an overprotective Roshan who is unusually hasty in her killing of Kabiha. Later, when she loses her fight with Basim, Roshan leaves the Brotherhood, but does eventually pick back up her fight with the Order of the Ancients. Roshan is the quest giver of the sole side quest in Valhalla's final chapter, set around 20 years or more after Mirage begins. Roshan enlists Eivor's help when she sets out to kill Order member Al-Sila, who's stationed in England. Now, this quest released a few weeks after Mirage's big reveal, so it's got a few teasers that I'd assumed Mirage would elaborate on. Roshan speaks about how she picked up the blade again after years of painful absence, and we now understand why she left the Hidden Ones. But what she retrieves from Al-Sila is a scroll. It's described as the future, a seed to plant in Jerusalem. Now the mind jumps to AC1 and the Levantine Brotherhood. The language used here, a seed to plant, makes it sound as if Roshan laid some kind of foundation for the formation of the Assassin Brotherhood in that region. But this isn't given a definitive answer. It could have to do with the Temple of Solomon, or anything really. This one is just left vague. Next month, a novel based on Roshan's earlier years releases, and that may feature an epilogue of some kind that explains this mystery. But that's my analysis of the ending of Assassin's Creed Mirage. This game leaves a lot up to interpretation, so much is left vague, so if you've got anything to add, please go for it. I did just upload an entire series recap, so if anything here doesn't quite track, there's a good chance it's in there, but otherwise, that's it. Thank you guys for watching, leave a like if you enjoyed, and if you didn't, maybe let me know why. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.